All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started, and I will kick things off this evening. So, thank you all so much for joining us tonight to participate in our event, Pigments, Postures, and Plaster, a urologist's observations of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, hosted by the Discover Society of the Museum of Science. For those of you I have not met before, my name is Lindsay Stanley, and I am the Director of Annual Giving at the Museum of Science. And whether you're relatively new to our family or have been a part of the group for a long time, I want to first and foremost thank you for your involvement and support of our institution, particularly during these challenging times. The mission of the museum is to inspire a lifelong love of science in everyone. And we as an institution have innovated and evolved under these COVID times to be an organization that is not only place based, but one with a digital home as well. As many of you already know, in response to the pandemic, the museum immediately took action by creating a new digital platform for our programs and educators, meeting people in their homes in ways they value. The launch of MOS at Home has enabled people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities to engage and connect with science in new and exciting ways at a time when it is needed most. Members of our Discover Society are critical to developing the foundation upon which the entire museum operates, supporting projects that are necessary for the daily operations of the museum and enabling the creation of programs like MOS at Home and beyond. Not only do discoverers make up nearly 80% of our annual fund, but they provide the vision, leadership, and support needed to ensure the museum remains a world-renowned center for knowledge seeking that has an impact not just on Greater Boston, but around the country and the globe. Membership to the Discover Society starts with a gift of $2,500 per year to the annual fund and encompasses a wide range of benefits, including a museum membership and access to exclusive events like the one you are attending tonight. It is our hope that you will consider joining this group of supporters following this evening's event. And before we jump into the program, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping items. First, you will have the opportunity to submit questions to our speaker by typing your questions into the chat pane of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time. We will collect them and save time at the end to address as many as we can. Additionally, it would be great if you could change your display name so we can be sure to know who everyone is with us tonight. You can do this by clicking on the participants button, then hover your mouse over your name and the participants list and click on rename. And lastly, please make sure to keep yourself on mute during our presentation. And with that, I will now turn it over to Museum Advisor and Discoverer, Mike Magliochetti, to share a few words.
Hi, thank you, Lindsay. Good evening, everyone. God, it's so terrific to see so many folks joining us here tonight. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. As Lindsay said, I'm Mike Magliochetti. I'm actually an operating partner with Riverside Partners in Boston, a private equity firm. And I've been involved with the museum for about 3 years now. As Lindsay said, I'm on the Discover Society, but I'm also a member of the Discoverers Committee and Marketing Committee and Soundbites Committee for the museum. And it's really been truly rewarding for me to feel like I'm part of a team making a difference and catalyzing interest in STEM for children and adult learning. And for me, I grew up around the Boston area and coming to the museum as a grammar school student, it really sparked an interest for me in science and sort of validated what I really have come to love. And I think, through all of us, our time is so precious and sought after, but it's sought after by many. And but involvement in the museum is something, at least for me, that's paid real dividends personally. And this is a time when the museum, as Lindsay mentioned, needs us more than ever. We're navigating through this COVID crisis, and it's been such a trying time with financially, with attendance. And so I hope everyone on the Zoom tonight enjoys Dr. Zappala's presentation, which I know you will, but also feels the same draw to make a difference through the museum and think about donating. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Zappala. He is a clinical assistant professor of urology at Tufts University School of Medicine. And I met Dr. Zappala, has to be about 15 years ago. And I was running a company called Claros Diagnostics, and I recruited him to serve on our clinical advisory board. And over the course of 5 or 6 years, proved to be an invaluable resource to us. And in addition to his day job, you should know as a surgeon, he's also a serial inventor, having licensed medical technology to companies in the space. And I know this because I've played bad cop for him in helping negotiate agreements. So, and after Claros was acquired in 2011, I transferred over to private equity, transitioned my career. And like anything, you want to surround yourself with great people. And so first person I called was Dr. Zappler as I was formulating a clinical advisory board for Riverside. And he's been a member of that group for about 8 years now. And in addition to being colleagues, as I'm sure you can understand, I consider Stephen one of my dearest friends. And I learned of his passion for the arts when we traveled with our families together to Europe, and then became really amazed at the exhaustive work he's done in analyzing the Sistine Chapel and works of Michelangelo, specifically, around the anatomic symbolism, looking at it through the lens of a physician, which you'll all see a little bit about tonight. And he's in the process of publishing a book, Pigments, Postures, and Plaster, a urologist's guide to the Sistine Chapel, from which I'm honored to have written the foreword. So I consider myself very, very fortunate to know him, excited about this event, and really want to thank him for giving us his time this evening for such a noteworthy cause. So thank you, Steve. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. And thanks all to the entire Museum of Science team. This is quite an honor for me as well. I grew up in the greater Boston area in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And boy, oh boy, for a young boy from Lawrence to go to the Museum of Science, that was a highlight. And who knows, that may have been the inspiration why I chose a career in science. But tonight we're going to talk about a great, great man, a marvelous man, Michelangelo, and his contributions to the art world of Western civilization. What we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit of museum work, a little bit of science, but a lot about art history and a lot about intrigue. But before we even go into the discussion, I asked permission if I could do a dedication, because if it wasn't for these people, I don't think we would have the opportunity for me to have this knowledge. This is my wife, Margaret, my son, Michael, and his wife, Audrey, and my daughter, Carolina. And all the trips we've taken to Italy or Rome, and instead of having an extra gelato in Piazza Navona, instead of going to the Via Veneto and going shopping, I would drag them to see every fresco, to look at every church and every museum. And it's because of them that we've had this knowledge base that I've been able to use. So I thank my family very, very, very much. I dedicate this to them. But there's two questions that always get asked about the talk about the Sistine Chapel. It's been there for over 500 years. So what possibly new could you uncover? Why bother looking at that? It's been there for a great amount of time. And the second question was probably more pertinent. Whatever drove or what inspired myself as a urologic surgeon to tackle a project like this? And the Italians have a great word for this. It's called l'anima, which means soul. And then the soul is what drives the passion and the motivation. But there were three special vehicles that I use. The first is, I know some of my colleagues from urology are on the call, but Dr. Blute always inspired me to read this book. It was called The Diagnosis of the Acute Abdomen. And we're trained as surgeons to use one word, observation. And nowadays we order a CAT scan or an MRI. But when my generation, we were observing the patient, looking for signs and symptoms. And I started to apply the skill of observation that we learned as surgeons to art history. The second thing, I'll take you to Rome for a second, was another inspiration. This is the Campo di Fiori. It's one of the most beautiful piazzas in Rome. And it's equivalent to our Faneuil Hall Quincy Market. So in the morning and during the early afternoon, it's a flower market, it's a fruit market. And as the day goes on, it becomes Rome's dining establishments, and then tents are taken down and it becomes the nightclub scene. But right smack in the middle, you can see this statue. And this statue is a wonderful Dominican friar whose name was Giordano Bruno. And 50 years before Galileo, he had the opportunities to keep looking at the stars and looking at the planets. And he started to question the dogma that the church was professing. So he went running to the Pope and he asked the Pope, he said, Holy Father, with your permission, I've been looking at the stars and the planets, and I don't believe that the Earth is the center of the universe. I believe it's actually the sun, and the Earth goes around the sun in an orbit, and moons go around that. And the Pope said, let me see those plans. And he said, have you shown these to anybody else? He said, no, I came here first. And he says, fine, the Inquisition will talk to you. And they burnt him at the stake. And I think this is important because he had the courage to seek out the truth and to question what was always taught as dogma. We're going to apply that second theory tonight. But the third theory comes from one of my professors, and this is Professor Donald Coffey from Johns Hopkins University, a brilliant man, and he did a lot of the molecular work on DNA. And he put forth a theory of organized chaos. And organized chaos, he would always say, comes, so if you look at a blizzard of a snowstorm, and you look at all those snowflakes flying around, it looks quite chaotic. And no two snowflakes are alike. Go into each snowflake, and you look at the water that binds with ice, that water molecule, that's the integral component. And all of a sudden, it becomes very, very organized. And I'll take it a different level. If you look at this picture of Earth from the space shuttle, you say, wow, the Earth looks very, very disorganized. You have oceans and land, you have all types of animals. And even if you look at the people on the planet, we have men and women, we have beards, and we have long hair and short hair. But if we go down to the cellular level, actually, if you inside each cell, we have a nucleus, and thereafter we have chromosomes, and break it apart even further, we have genes. And if we break it apart even further, there are only 4 base pairs. So although it looked very, very chaotic, when you break it apart and dismantle it, it's very, very organized. With those 3 vehicles, let's now travel across the ocean. And here you can see St. Peter's Square, and you see the beautiful dome that Michelangelo had built. And over here on the right-hand side of the slide, this is the Apostolic Palace where the Pope lived. This floor here was the Borgia apartments, and Julius II, we'll talk about in a little bit, constructed the apartments above. But way in the distance, this funny shaped building is the Sistine Chapel. And that's where I'm going to take you on this journey. And it's called the Sistine Chapel because it was built by Pope Sixtus, the name Sistinus in Italian. And he used a Florentine architect, Pontelli. And Pontelli he wasn't there to build chapels. Pontelli built military installations. So if you look at the Sistine Chapel, it really doesn't look like a chapel. There are no exterior doors. It had little slits in the walls that they could shoot arrows, and they put a lot of funnels where you could pour boiling oil down expecting a war. But remember something, Rome at this time of history, it wasn't a very pleasant place. Where the church was being built, St. Peter's, this was marsh, it was full of malaria, there was poor sanitation, and there were so many factions fighting that very often they had to have places to escape for a battle. And when they built the Sistine Chapel, it's built to almost the exact dimensions of King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Well, Sixtus built the temple and he had the walls frescoed, but the ceiling, he simply painted the ceiling with a dark blue sky with golden stars. And it's his nephew that gives credit for the ceiling. And this is a Raphael painting of Pope Julius II. Pope Julius II didn't take his name from Julius I. Rather, it's claimed he took his name from Julius Caesar. His secular name was Giuliano della Rovere. And della Rovere means from the oak tree. That's why even if you look at Raphael's painting on the top of the chair, the throne that he's seated upon, you'll see acorns. And a lot of the works done from Julius II, you'll see oak trees or acorns. Now, if you look at him, he was called Il Papa Terribile, or the warrior pope. He had quite a temper. He manned his own army. If you look at him dressed here in this portrait, he's actually wearing a crimson cape and he's covered and adorned with jewels. He looks more like a king than a pope, and he had quite a lifestyle. He had several women, which we're not going to discuss, and he was afflicted with syphilis as well. The intriguing thing is he was actually the nephew of Sixtus, and the word nephew in Italian is nebudi. And one of the things we now realize is that if you take positions of authority or power and you transfer it to one of your nieces and nephews or a family member, we call that nepotism. So nepotism has its origin going all the way back to the 1400s. Well, Julius II really wouldn't have been as famous if it wasn't for this man. You'll always notice him because he has this cracked nose, the nasal plate is cracked, and he has this rather peculiar beard. And for the times, he died at almost 90 years of age. And this is Mr. Buonarroti. Now, you and I may not know him as Mr. Buonarroti. You probably know him by his first name, Michelangelo. And Michelangelo was born and raised in northern Tuscany in a region called Caprese. And at the age of 23, he carved this amazing sculpture called the Pietà. It was carved for a French cardinal. And when he did the work, people were astonished. They said, it's impossible. How could this young man have carved such a beautiful statue? Here you can see Mary. She looks like she has the body of a New York Jets fullback, and she's holding the lifeless body of her 33-year-old son. Yet she has the soft and delicate face of an 18-year-old girl. And people were astonished. They said, there's no way Michelangelo could have done this. And he never wanted to sign any of his, either his sculptures or his paintings, because accused of not doing this. You look at this chap going across Mary's chest. He went back into the chapel at night and took out a chisel, and you can see it across the bottom here. Michelangelo Buonarroti from Florence ha fatto. He put his name on the Pietà. But just so you know, this wasn't the only Pietà that he created. There's another one he created for his own when he died. This one's located in Florence, just across the street from the cathedral. And here you can see Jesus being held by his mother and also Mary Magdalene. And this is Nicodemus. But what I'm bringing this up for, if you look at the face of Nicodemus, Michelangelo has put his own face. He then was asked to take a big slab of marble that was being worked on in Florence, and they wanted to carve an 18-foot sculpture of David. And someone had started and given up, and they brought in Michelangelo. And he looked at this partially chiseled body of marble, and he said, I'll challenge this and I'll take this job on. And what he always said was David was always inside that block of marble. That's all he had to do was get rid of all the excess. And everyone looks at David's eyes, but we as urologists are trained to look down. So you see the umbilicus, and there's a lot of anomalies we identified below the umbilicus. The first thing was, he wasn't circumcised, and David being Jewish, you'd think he would have been circumcised, and no one knows why. He had this inverted pubic hair triangle. But what I find fascinating is look at his hand. His hand is much too big for his body, and no one understands why Michelangelo did that. This man did not make mistakes, but I don't know why. Well, Julius II was very impressed with the sculpturing of Michelangelo, and he wanted to bring Michelangelo from Florence down to Rome to develop his own mausoleum. And he was planning a massive mausoleum, the size greater than the one the Roman emperors would do. This would have 50 statues, and at the top, he would have a 20-foot sculpture of Julius II himself. Michelangelo was so impressed, he said, I'll take this job on. But when he said this, he had to leave and go to Carrara. And when he went to Carrara, he was going to chisel away about 100 tons of white marble for this massive tomb, because that's what Michelangelo wanted to do. He wanted to sculpt. But when he returned, he didn't return to a friendly Rome because of these two men. On the right is Mr. Donato Bramante. Now, his actual name was Donato D'Angelo. Bramante means ravenous because he had quite a carnal appetite. He was a very, very ambitious man, and the Pope had made him the director of all the construction projects at St. Peter's Basilica. They were taking down Constantine's church and building this massive St. Peter. And when the time came, Julius said, I don't want to live in the Borgia apartments. I want my own apartments. And Bramante said, I'll bring in from the court of Urbino, Raphael. And Raphael was the boy wonder. He was very courtly and very stately. He would party all night long and then stay up and paint. And he did some of the most amazing frescoes. But these two men were in constant competition with Michelangelo, thwarting his efforts. And Bramante told Julius II, it's not a good idea to build your mausoleum while you're still alive. I think you should cancel the mausoleum project, of which Julius II did. So when Michelangelo came back, he was devastated. He had lost this opportunity to sculpt. But Julius II said, what else can we do with him? And Bramante wanted to get rid of him. He was going to be an upstart who was going to cause trouble. So they gave him an almost impossible challenge. Why doesn't he fresco the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel? Michelangelo had two options at that point. Either he could just hightail it out of town, which what Bramante wanted, or he would start this project where he has no experience in fresco, he has no experience in painting, he would most likely fail and be evicted. So let's take you now to the chapel ceiling. It's a barrel vault, and it's a massive, massive amount of area. It encompasses about the size of an American basketball court. It took Michelangelo 4 years to create this fresco, just the ceiling. And it took a recent restoration project 20 years to restore the colors. I just want to call your attention to the right of the slide. This is Perugino's Christ giving over the keys to St. Peter, and this is probably one of the most beautiful wall frescoes there. And I think it's important to know that Michelangelo's, this size of the ceiling is massive, to the point that if you look at the largest frescoes in the world, the largest one was in the Santa Maria Novella with Girondello. And when he did that, that was 5,000 square feet on the wall. This is going to be 70 feet in the air. Now, he didn't go to Home Depot to get his plaster, and he didn't get his from Staples. He had to crush the lapis. He had to get pozzolana, which is a volcanic ash, mix it with slate lime, and you would put 1 day's amount of wet plaster on the ceiling and install the pigments that were generated through a cartoon onto the wall. So the pigment would become part of the stone itself when it dried. This is an amazing undertaking. When you look at the entire ceiling, I call it a visual cacophony, because there's no vantage point. It doesn't seem to be any type of order. This is organized chaos at its best. In the center, he'll place 9 scenes from the Old Testament, and on the sides, he'll put Roman sibyls, and he'll put Hebrew prophets intermingled. Why he did it like this, no one understands. The Pope, Julius II, had told him, I want scenes from the New Testament with Jesus and the apostles. And he did the exact opposite. There's not one scene of Jesus or the apostles in this entire ceiling. Let's take it apart. But before we even go into the ceiling, I want to take you off to the eastern wall of the ceiling. The east wall is where the Pope would enter. And you'd see on this thing, I'm going to focus on 3 of the pictures, okay? There's a lunette first. This is Zechariah. He's the father of John the Baptist. And you have 2 scenes on the right and the left. And let's take these apart, beginning with Zacharias. Zechariah is an amazing guy because he predicted that the king of Israel would come into Jerusalem riding on an ass. And again, with the genealogy theme that's always being brought up in the Sistine Chapel ceiling, you can see he was the father of John the Baptist, but look what he's wearing. He's wearing the golden colors and the blue color. These are the colors of the Della Rovere family, as if Michelangelo is saying the Della Roveres were present even at the time of the great prophets. And here he's reading a book. Now behind him are 2 young men peering over his shoulders. And this is important to study these 2 men, because one of them has his fingers crossed with his thumb coming out. And this is a very, very vulgar, obscene gesture in Renaissance time. It's equivalent to what we would do today, or not we, but some people would do, by raising one finger up. So what's going on? Well, wait a minute, look back. At the face of Zechariah, Michelangelo has positioned Julius II himself. And Julius always wanted to watch over Michelangelo. Michelangelo would lock the door of the chapel and would shroud it in large canvases so no one could see what he was doing. Is he not telling people he doesn't want to be watched while he's doing his work? And let's look at some of the fresco on the right and then the fresco on the left. The one on the right, again, here's this man. I've been telling you, this is David slewing Goliath. But David is wearing the colors of the Della Rovere family once again. But more important, I'm going to show you, this is now after the restoration, but before the restoration, if you look in the face of David, Michelangelo has positioned his own face. Michelangelo has taken this project, this colossal project for this gargantuan ceiling, and he's going to take it on. And he's telling everyone, no, I'm going to take it on. I'm going to finish the job, just the way David took care of Goliath. And on the opposite wall, you see a man resting and 2 women carrying some food. But really, is that what's going on here? Not really. The woman's actually wearing the colors, once again, of the Della Rovere family. But if you look, this is actually Judith and Holofernes, the Assyrian general. He was sent to Jerusalem to slaughter the Israelites. And while he came and slept and she fed him all his drink, she decapitated him. So she's not carrying a platter of food. If you look at it real carefully, she's carrying the head. And once again, in that head is Michelangelo's face. So flanking him, taking on Goliath, he's telling people he's going to finish this job, or Julius II is going to have his head on a platter. And one final thing, if you look way down below, underneath Zacharias himself, you see the tree of life. You see the papal keys with the papal tiara. But in the tree of life, he doesn't put a palm tree. He puts a oak tree for the Della Rovere family. Well, let's now focus on one panel. That's the central panel, which is called the creation of Adam. And this is probably one of the most beautiful scenes, the most notable scenes that we see. And clearly you see Adam, the perfect male, and you see God, and you see he's in the heavens, and the angels are all help carrying him. And that's the way most people will interpret this. And hopefully at the end of the night, you'll see more to it than that. This is prior to the I had to begin my journey to studying Michelangelo. Here you can see that he's always been thought of in the heavens, but Frank Meschberger, who was a gynecologist, said, you know, he's not in a cloud, he's in a cross-section of the human brain, which is astonishing. And I first saw this in 1990, it was published in Scientific American. And I said, I wonder what other symbols Michelangelo could have hidden inside this amazing fresco. So we see the creator reaching out to touch Adam, but you and I weren't the first people to say, wow, those two fingers are amazing. Really, it was Hollywood. It was Steven Spielberg. If you recall in the film, E.T. goes out to touch Elliot, but that's where the similarities end. Because if you look at the hands and the fingers are both in full extension and they actually touch. Let's look back now, what's happening to the creator and Adam. Here, if you look at the fingers, the Lord's hand is reaching out, exerting great effort, trying to reach out to mankind. But look at the finger of Adam. He could barely lift a finger on the day of his creation. Is this what humankind is all about? And look at the wrists. The Lord has the wrist all the way in full extension. And look at Adam. He's so lackadaisical. Is this what humankind's going to be like after he's generated? And finally, take your attention to the palms. Both palms are down in this. And if you look at it, what does this mean? If you look at art in general, the palms are usually exposed, especially if you look at saints. It reflects peace or pace. Both palms here are down. In Western civilization, when you have a handshake, you expose your palms so you're not concealing a weapon. And is Michelangelo not saying there's going to be conflict between the creator and humankind? Well, now we look back and we say, gee, well, wait a minute now. I mean, God is actually in our brain. Yes, and as Michelangelo is saying, not only is God in your brain, but he's coming out of your frontal lobe. He didn't have the Lord coming out of your cortex, or your cerebellum, or your pituitary. He's coming out of the frontal lobe, the part of the brain that actually controls your affect and your emotions. And what's intriguing, he's stating that God is inside your brain, right in the center of your brain. And you don't need the clergy or the papacy to reach out and get to God. And look at the arms. The Lord is reaching out with his right hand. His right arm is in full extension. Well, the right arm in Latin would be dextra, dexter. And the left, if you look at Adam, he has his left arm out and he can't even extend his entire left arm. He's resting his left arm. So the right arm exposed to the sinister arm of Adam. And boy, God looks pretty darn good. He's got the face of a grandfather-like figure. His hair is blowing. He's got a wonderful face. And like my daughter said, boy, Daddy, he's jacked. He's got a wonderful set of deltoid and biceps muscles. And I want to focus on how good he looks, or does he? Because now if you look at Adam, well, let's compare Adam to the creator. Well, let's look at the pelvis. And in a classic Renaissance painting, this is a masculine pelvis. It's an open pelvis. And that's exactly what you see in Adam. But now let's look at the creator. His legs are crossed. His pelvis is closed. The cloak that he's wearing is draped over his thighs exposed. Now, why would we have a masculine pelvis and then a feminine pelvis? Well, let's look at his face one more time and take that beautiful face and let's block it out. What do you notice on the chest of God? God has two breasts. with crossed legs. Is Michelangelo not telling us that this creator has both morphological features of both man and woman? And the hands are quite unique as well. For example, if you look at the creator's right hand, it's a very youthful hand. There's no arthritis. It's a wonderful hand, the type you'd want to shake. But let's look one more time at the contralateral, the left hand. It's arthritic, it's forlorn, it's bent. What's going on? Why does he have two completely different hands? And if you look more carefully, you can see it that not only is this hand youthful, but this one has tremendous amount of arthritis in it. And I couldn't figure this out. We've come up with our own theory. Recently, there was a portrait of Michelangelo shown at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And every time you see a portrait of Michelangelo in a textbook, that's all you see. You see Michelangelo's face. And they don't show you the fact that there's an entire portrait. Remember, and he would put his left hand on the sculpture. And sometimes when you bang away, you miss and you can hit your left hand and it looks arthritic. But more important, Michelangelo had crippling gout beginning at a very, very young age. And gout doesn't affect just your toes and your knees, but can also affect your hands. And this hand may be the hand of Michelangelo touching vide, life, transferring it to Adam himself. What I also find interesting, if you go back inside the brain or the cloud, you look at the constituents, they're holding on. They're telling the creator, maybe you shouldn't be leaving. Indeed, the creator's left arm is 30% longer than the right arm. They're stretching it back, saying, come on back in. I'm not sure we want to get over there. And by the way, take one last look at Adam. He has an umbilicus. Well, I thought he was created on this day. And if he has an umbilicus, that means he comes from a mother. What I found peculiar also, if you look at Adam's right foot, he has a very wide separation, abduction of the right great toe. But wait a minute, the Lord has it on both of his feet. And if you look more carefully at Adam's left foot, he has the same deformity there. Now, why would Michelangelo, or why would the creator give a congenital malformation to on the day of creation that's actually quite painful to walk on? Well, maybe Michelangelo was talking about Genesis when he said, let's make man in our own image according to our likeness. Well, that's plausible, but probably not what happened. Because I think what Michelangelo was trying to do was say, I have to put forth things that I know best. Let's look at what I mean. If you go to the opposite wall, we saw the eastern wall, now the western wall, here's the prophet Jonah. You know Jonah and the whale. Jonah was destined to be a prophet, but he didn't like it. And he went down to the fishing port. He says, I want to be a fisherman. And he became a fisherman. On the second day of the fishing trip, a horrible storm had developed. And the other men on the boat said, it's all because of you. We've been jinxed. The Lord is after us. And they threw Jonah over the boat. And Jonah was swallowed by a whale. Well, that sounds great, but Michelangelo was from Tuscany. And he didn't know what a whale looked like. He had no idea what a whale was. But in 1510, there were a lot of boats coming back from the Caribbean in the New World, and they were describing this huge fish that came out of the Caribbean waters. Can you see it? So Jonah's not bit by a whale, but he's being swallowed by a tarpon. And he didn't know what a blowhole was. He only knew what a pig's nostrils were. So he's placed pig's nostrils in the mouth of the tarpon, which is quite interesting. But also, he has that funny same toe deformity that we saw in the creator and also in Adam. So he doesn't sign portraits, but neither do other sculptures. Let's look at David from Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and this is the Galleria Borghese. And Bernini doesn't sign his sculpture. What he does, he places his own face in that of David. And if you look at Caravaggio's work, also in the Galleria Borghese, here this shows David severing the head of Goliath, and now he's holding up Goliath's head. But in the face of Goliath, that's actually Caravaggio himself. And if you recall earlier, we were talking about the papal apartments directly above the Borgia apartments. They brought in Raphael, and this is probably the most famous wall fresco of all time, I believe, all times. And this is called the School of Athens. And here you can see Raphael has brought together all the Greeks and Romans, and they're all engaged in conversations from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle. But look way down here in the lower right-hand corner. Raphael places himself. He doesn't sign it, but he puts his face there. And he also puts his friend Donato Bramante here. So Bramante's here. They're all taking part in this amazing celebration with the Greeks and the Romans. But here's this recluse. Here's this recluse. And let's look at him more carefully. He's got a horrible arthritic knees. He's a gouty knees. He has gouty hands. And that's Michelangelo himself. He was a recluse. He was a taciturn. He wanted to be alone. Whereas Raphael would be outgoing and always had an entourage. Michelangelo was suspicious of everybody. But again, look at his knees, look at his hands. And this is Michelangelo when he was only about 30 years of age. Let's look back one more time then. What's going on with the creation of Adam? Well, look in the middle. Eve is there. Well, we think it's Eve. Well, what's Eve doing? Because I thought she came from Adam's rib while he slept. So this goes against church dogma. Secondarily, if you look at the angels, these angels are really neat. They don't have any wings. I always said, what are they waiting for, Jimmy Stewart to ring a bell on Christmas Eve? Because, you know, an angel gets his wings when they ring the bell, and you hear it like that. What's intriguing is Michelangelo has given the color clothing a gray-white cloak to the creator himself. You know, everyone would think that the creator would be regal, the color purple. The color purple came, they would take prisoners to the shores, and they would open thousands and thousands of mussels and mollusks, and they would take this tiny ink sac. It would take them months to get 1 teaspoon of this ink, and they would make the color purple. But Michelangelo says, no, I'm going to give this creator the colors of a commoner, that this is going to be a god for all men. And by the way, Michelangelo had all kinds of difficulty, could never create the body of a woman. And if you look at this body of the creator, it's probably the best example of a female torso that you could ever see from Michelangelo. Now, what is he doing with Adam? Well, Adam is always felt to be lying on the earth. Indeed, the name Adam is derived from the name Adama, which is Hebrew for earth. But is he really on the soil? There are multiple pigments used here, and he also, it's contoured. I don't think Michelangelo put Adam on the earth. I think Michelangelo is saying Adam is lying on a rock. And the name rock in Latin is derived from Petrus. And you know the expression that we hold true in the Catholic Church from Peter, tu es Petra, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And you'll hear this expression over and over. Tibi dabo claves regni calorum. To you I will give the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And indeed, if you go to St. Peter's Cathedral and you look in the beautiful dome that Michelangelo built, those words are written, these are 9-foot letters, Tibi dabo claves regni calorum. And there it is again, tu es Petra. And again, the dome is directly overlying the body of St. Peter. And is Michelangelo not telling the people that don't get your support from the papacy or the church that's going on right now? Get back to basics, get back to the teachings of Peter. Well, things just don't happen. Things inspire certain painters or artisans to reflect their thoughts. And in 1506, this sculpture was excavated in a Roman hill near the Palatine. And this is Laocoon and his sons. Laocoon was a Trojan priest in present-day Asia Minor. And he was warning the people of Troy, be skeptical, be wary of that Greek horse, and don't let that Greek horse come in. And he was the first man to probably say, beware of a Greek bearing gifts. And they said, no, it can't be. This Greek horse looks wonderful. And they banished Laocoon and his sons to the shores of the Mediterranean, where they were attacked by serpents and killed. Now, this is an amazing sculpture. It was apparently sculpted by the Rhodesian sculptors. And according to Pliny the Elder, this sculpture was placed in the palace of Nero, and it was lost for the next 1,500 years until it was excavated in 1506. It's presently in the museum, the Vatican Museum. And indeed, 4 million people a year spend 75 euros. And the number one sculpture they look at is this one. Because classic Greek sculpture, they're fixed, they're frozen. Somebody's applied 220 volts to this sculpture. This sculpture is alive. There's so much motion. And it's always been stated that only Michelangelo could replicate the scenes that you see here, the action, the dynamo. Well, let's take a look at this dynamo, what Michelangelo has done now. Let's take a look at this torso with the deltoids and the biceps. You'll see that again over here. He's placed this entire torso into that of the creator himself. And right around the same time, there was an excavation from the Belvedere torso, the beautiful torso. And it was purchased by Julius II. He told Michelangelo, I think I want you to put the legs back on this sculpture as well as the arms and the head. And Michelangelo said, no, I think the man who created this wanted just the torso. And it still sits there today. And this is probably a Roman copy of a Greek original. But Michelangelo was so impressed with this torso. Here it is here. But now let's take a look at the torso of Adam. It replicates directly there. And finally, at the time when the barbarians were coming through Rome, they were taking beautiful Roman statues, and people would bury the statues inside of large wells and cover them. Well, they would unearth a lot of these wells come the Renaissance, and they were finding many, many sculptures. And this one was almost pristine. And this is the Apollo of Belvedere. And here is the Apollo getting ready to unleash his arrow. But look at the face of Apollo and his amazing hairstyle. I'll show you this face one more time, because there's that face, and here it is here. Now, granted, he straightened out his hair with some curlers, but that's the face of Apollo with the same exact haircut. So Michelangelo would take things that he knew and incorporate it into his artwork. So why do we have the Sistine Chapel now? We have it because of this. This is the conclave of cardinals. When it comes time to elect a new pope, all the cardinals will gather in here. And in years past, they would have cots and they would bring in their foods and they would stay in there. The conclave means enclosed, conclave, conclave. And you know what happens, they would put two chimneys there. And if black smoke came out of the chimney, there was no pope to be elected that day. But if white smoke came out, they elected a new pope. And if they elected a new pope, they would give him the key to open the door to let everyone out. They were no longer enclosed. So it went from conclave to, in Italian, we say conclave, with the key. Maybe that's why if you look at the papal flag today, you see the papal tiara, and there are two keys. One is the key to the kingdom of heaven, and the other is the key to earthly goods. Well, I just want to step back for the last few minutes and just talk about Michelangelo and some of the things that we've identified from the anatomy. This is one of his first sculptures in 1496. This is Bacchus, the god of wine and music. And take a look at this foot deformity one more time. We saw this in a couple of the fresco scenes in the past. Now, if I take you back to Florence, so you take you to the Academy, you can see here are the four of the slaves that are indentured to stone, way in the distance of this massive sculpture of David, just to tell you how big that statue is. When people look, they look at David, they look at his other organs, but if you look down at his foot, David also has a toe anomaly. And this is prior to all the work that he's been doing in the Sistine Chapel. And if you look at one of his few paintings, and this is the Holy Family in the round, this is a painting on canvas that's now in the Uffizi. Even the baby Jesus has a foot anomaly with his toe. And if you look at St. Joseph, not only does he have a problem with his toe, but his entire extensor tendon of the foot is showing tophaceous deposits that we see with gout. So he has the toe anomaly and also some gouty anomalies. And if you're ever in Rome, please visit this church. It's San Pietro in Vincoli. It's St. Peter in Chains. And it's a rather, you wouldn't know it. It's in a small neighborhood. And in here, you can see the chains that St. Peter was chained to when they brought him to Rome. And you can see St. Peter here on the side. Again, his palms are exposed, pace, peace, not like we saw in the hands touching in the Sistine Chapel, but he's holding the two keys. But why do you go there? Most people go to see the tomb of Julius, dramatically scaled back. It's in the back of the church. And here you can see all the statues are all looking towards the altar, except one. Michelangelo had taken Moses holding the Ten Commandments, and he actually went back and carved out his face and put hair, and on the opposite side had Moses turning away from the altar. And almost as an insult to Julius II, instead of putting a 20-foot marble sculpture, he put a 6-foot Julius II who's lying down and resting, not doing much work. But the reason I'm really showing you all this is how he did Moses. And it's probably, it's a fantastic, fantastic sculpture. But Moses didn't have the time to see an orthopedic surgeon either. He has the same toe deformity. And one of my most beautiful churches in Rome is directly across the street from the Pantheon. This is Santa Maria sopra Minerva, St. Mary on top of Minerva. Minerva is the Roman equivalent of Athena. And if you go to the front of the church, way on the left, you'll see Christ the Redeemer, one of Michelangelo's sculptures. It's a fantastic body image, and he was adorned with the Victorian time with this golden area. But take a look on the right, you can see that he also had this toe deformity. And if you go back to when he was only 23 years of age, and when you look at the Pietà, you say, wow, let's focus on the body of Jesus. Let's focus on her beautiful face of Mary. But if you go from the side, with permission, and you look at the feet of Jesus, he has the same toe deformity. And if I take you back to the Sistine Chapel ceiling, whether you look at Joel or you look at Isaiah or you look at Ezekiel, they all have the same type of toe deformity. And if you look at the Sibyls, Cumae, Libica, or Delphi, they also have the same toe deformities. And Cumae is a really strange looking woman. I just want to spend a second talking about her. Cumae was the first Greek colony in Italy. It was in southern Italy, right on the shores of the Mediterranean. And we call this the city, and that new city is called Neapolis, which is present day Naples. And here's the creation of Eve, also one of the panels of the Sistine Chapel. While Adam slept, God took one of his ribs and molded into and that's fantastic, but he didn't have a chance to see an orthopedic surgeon. And even this one I love, this is the temptation and the expulsion from paradise. And here Adam and Eve are getting tempted by the devil, but he didn't have time to see the orthopedic surgeon. He's still walking on a painful foot. But just to tell you that Michelangelo could only do what he knew best. If you recall the story, they were tempted with an apple. But again, Michelangelo, being from Tuscany, didn't really have many apple trees. He had fig trees. So they're being tempted with figs. Finally, they'll take you to the Louvre in Paris. And here we see two of Michelangelo's sculptures that were borrowed by Napoleon Bonaparte, and somehow they never made it back. But these are called the captive slave, and these slaves because they're indentured to stone, and the dying slave. And the reason I'm showing you these two is that they both have the same exact toe deformity. And if you look carefully at the dying slave, he has this incredible cervical posture, and he has this hairpin turn to his arm. And we'll see this again, and it was just another statue. And this toe deformity is called a hallux varus deformity. It can be congenital, you can be born with it, or it can be an acquired thing that we call a sandal foot. If you have a gouty toe, if you have gouty toes as a young man, you'll have this toe deformity. And I'm trying to say, this is the toe signature of Michelangelo. He didn't have to put his name, he didn't have to put his imprint. He no longer had to sketch his name as he did on Mary's chest. Let's go back one moment now. Let's look at this Laocoon sculpture, which is fascinating. Now, it was excavated in 1506, and as soon as it was excavated, the papacy dispatched Michelangelo and Sangallo, the Florentine faction. They said, yes, unequivocally, this is the Laocoon sculpture, 1506. And Lynn Caddison from Columbia University has put forth a paper saying probably it was Michelangelo who had the means, the motive, and the money. This is probably his sculpture. He buried it, unearthed it, and sold it to the papacy. And people today are still going there. And she said it's probably his. And what I'm saying is she's absolutely correct. Because if we look back at the hallux varus deformity, you see it in Laocoon. You also see it in his sons. And more important, you can see the same cervical posture and almost the same faces. And that hairpin turn of the arm is exactly right. Just so you know, this sculpture was missing the right arm when it was excavated. And they had a competition led by Bramante and Raphael. And Michelangelo said the arm should go directly behind the head in a hairpin manner. But the winner, Raphael, gave it to another man they put the arm going way up in the air. He looked like Tony Manero in Saturday Night Fever. And in 1906, it was an Austrian excavation, and they came across an arm. And the arm had an amazing pin. And when they put the pin into the Laocoon sculpture and turned it the exact way, this is how the arm fit, exactly the way Michelangelo had described. Well, we began this discussion. We all saw God, or the creator, in a cloud, and Adam resting. We saw the fingers, we saw the palms, and then we started talking about the frontal lobe, and we came across so many things. And imagine we did this showing only one of the central panels. And I just want to congratulate Michelangelo for doing this but I want to thank all of you for listening. And, you know, one of the things I was really impressed with when I was reading all these papers of Michelangelo was one of his quotes where he said, "If people only knew how hard I worked to get my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all." Thank you so much for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
So this is Pete Jaffe. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really engaging. I'm just curious. I recently had seen some publications around the fact that they're publishing a 3-tome kind of 2-foot tall book that's basically reproducing a lot of the images from the Sistine Chapel. I'm just curious if you had any perspective on that. It sounds like it's a $22,000 3-tome set, and it seems like an interesting timing for your presentation.
Right, I actually saw that, and I saw the price tag. It's going to be an interesting book, how it's going to sell. I mean, that's I think what's even more important is what's traveling across America right now. There are these massive panels of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. I think that's all very, very exciting, but I think what we can do now is not only look at the panels and look at the book, but now come up with different interpretations. And I think really what's changed is that with the restoration, we now have more vibrant colors. I think that's really important. I saw the Sistine Chapel when it was dark from all the 500 years of soot. When you look at it now, it is vibrant. And why is it so vibrant? You know, we went to Naples and we gathered up some pozzolana. And if you take pozzolana, which is volcanic ash, when Michelangelo first did the ceiling, the first 6 months of work, the entire ceiling got coated with a fungus. It wasn't drying. Remember, Michelangelo was not a fresco painter. And he said, there's something wrong. The plaster is not drying. So he said the Romans used pozzolana, volcanic ash. So we took some pozzolana, and if you mix it with slake, lime, and water, you can place it and it dries quickly. It's dry within 12 hours. What's in it? We found that it was rich in calcium carbonate, aluminum, but more important, 30% of it is silica. It's glass. And that's why it's so vibrant. And I think when you look at that book, or you look at the slides that I showed this evening, the colors have come right back to life. It's just as vibrant now as it was when Michelangelo did the original work. I don't know much about the book personally. I don't think I'm going to be reaching out and buying it, but hopefully the Museum of Science will grab one.
Dr. Zappala, there's a question that's come in through chat here, and the question is, it's been mentioned that the big toe and the second toe are central to balance. And do you think Michelangelo was saying something about our ability as humans to stand independently and not be as reliant on authority for validation of who we are?
Wow, fantastic. I can't answer that. It's a powerful thought, and I promise I will look into it. That's a great thought. We called it the hallux deformity. That's what we looked at. That's a great thought, and I'll look at it. But if you try tonight when you go home to try to take your great toe and pull it away while you're at rest, you can't do that. It's something pathologic. So it makes sense that it would represent balance because you're spreading out your toes more. But try that. You can do it with your fingers. You can't do it with your toes.
Dr. Zappala, are you going to publish this work?
Yes, we've actually finished the manuscript now. Mike Maglicetti has written the preface, and it's ready to go. It's gone. First draft went to Smithsonian, and they'll be publishing it, hopefully. Thank you. One of the things my urology colleagues in the audience, we looked at Michelangelo's body, and he has a hypoplastic scrotum, and his genitalia are not really there. And this is actually, I believe, is 5-alpha reductase deficiency because he has no axillary or pubic hair. He has a hypoplastic scrotum, yet as look at him now, he's clearly masculine. He has no facial hair. But this is guave dolces that Pat Walsh had told us. There's a group of children in the Dominican Republic that lack the enzyme that converts testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. And these little boys who are XY, because they have such a small scrotum, they're raised as little girls. And by age 12 or 13, when the genitalia start to really kick in, they have enough to overpower the enzyme deficiency. And they're switched again from girls, now they're back to boys again. So it's called the guave dolces, testicles at 12.
It also seemed like the statue of Bacchus had varicocele. I don't know if you've looked into that.
No. Are you serious? Could be, Michael, but 99.9% of varicoceles are on the left side. The gonadal vein drains into the renal vein. It's probably a hydrocele.
We have another question coming in. What's next for your research? Another Michelangelo work or another
Yes.
artist?
That's a great question. So if you go back to one of the first slides I show where people are looking up, if you look at this slide right here, talked about tonight is this barrel vaulted ceiling, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. 30 years later, Michelangelo created the wall called Judgment Day. And what he did in that wall is absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everyone knows stories about where he positioned people, the bishops, and he made a Christ lifelike that is just so fantastic. I'll be focusing on that next. That's my next venture to dive into. And by the way, if people want to get into the some of the intricacies about this, there's so many great books in the Sistine Chapel, but one great book to begin with is by Ross King. It's called The Pope's Ceiling. It's really a fantastic way to begin, and I'd recommend that as a first book. Well, Mike, I want to thank everyone for their attention. I'll be available on email, so you can always reach me through the museum or through Mike. And I want to thank all for your attention and that you share my passion. Take care and stay well with this COVID situation. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr. Zappola. And thank you so much, Mike, and everybody for such an engaging and interesting presentation this evening, and to the Discover Society for your involvement with our programming. And thank you for everybody for joining us this evening. Like Dr. Zappola said, if you have any questions, feel free to email the individual giving team at the museum at friends@mos.org. And be well and have a wonderful night.
Great. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good night.